This is an interview on the 31st of March 2005 with Sergeant Joseph Dawson, V56140, VX117313, B Company, 12th Platoon, 39th Battalion. Joseph, how did you come to join the 39th Battalion?
Well, I volunteered from the, they called the volunteers, I was at that stage in the 32nd Infantry Battalion and in the militia. So I volunteered for this new formation. I didn't know what it was going to be, but that's how I finished up at 39th Battalion.
Did many from the 32nd follow you?
Oh, there was a few, not a lot, but there were a few.
You then went to Darley for some of your training?
That's right, 3 months we trained there.
And what are some of your recollections of your training at Darley?
Oh, some were funny, but in the main, they trained pretty hard. Because most of the fellas that were there had all been trained in the weapons that we had, like Lewis guns, which were 1917 vintage, and 303 rifles, and of course grenades and all that sort of stuff. Majority of them had training in those areas and had done all the parade ground stuff. So they were trained to a degree. When you look back, they were the wrong weapons. You know, we had grenades and grenade discharges and all that. But no Bren guns and no Owen guns. We eventually got Thompsons, but the weaponry range wasn't brilliant. But yeah, we did train and we trained hard, and I had a pretty good platoon. Alan was an excellent platoon commander.
This is Alan Moore.
Alan Moore, yeah, and we got on pretty well together. And yeah, we walked all over in Ballarat and those sort of places. I had a big exercise there called the Karangamite stunt, and I had a few Wirraways, and we had trucks. When I look back, I think it's very strange. You know, we trained in big 5-ton trucks and running around and open country. Had to jump and climb under barbed wire fences, and not very much good for the training we didn't have when we went to New Guinea in the jungle.
Who was your company commander at that stage?
Sam Templeton, wonderful man. Great pity of it was, in my opinion, is that he didn't really have the opportunity to fight with his company altogether. You know, the actions up to the time he got killed was sort of with small sections, and 11 platoon were the first to engage, and then I joined the 11 platoon at the Commercy River, Wairopi, where the Wairopi Bridge was. And from then on it was a case of ambush. That was my first, not joy, but first thing that happened in relation to the Japanese and their mortars. They were first class. So as soon as we fired on, within, I suppose, half a minute, they had mortars raining down on us. So we didn't have any, of course, thanks to the government of the day.
At this early stage of the 39th, even at Darley, was the morale and the feeling amongst the battalion good?
First class, yeah. There have been a few that I think were probably wits or whinges or what changed their mind, and the CO then, Colonel Conn, gave them the opportunity to go, which a few of them did. But as far as my platoon was concerned, and that would apply to the company too, they were all pretty good, all good fellas. Quite a lot of them came from up around around the Ballarat area, I think, Namurka area rather. But a lot of them have died now, of course.
At the end, towards the end of your time at Darley, and before you embarked up to Sydney on the Aquitania, there was a street parade in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Can you remember a little bit about that?
I can't remember much about that really, but we went, and we were all dressed up to look like the RAF, I think, but we weren't at that stage.
How did you feel about when you were basically packing up to head off to Sydney and then up to New Guinea? Was it an exciting time?
I felt pretty excited about it, and I think most of the troops did. We had got a bit bored stiff because for quite a lengthy period of time, they'd put us into these trucks, run around the camp. We'd have to get all our gear packed on, packs on, kit bags, and then they'd run around the camp and drop you off again. Just for fun. It was all training, I suppose. Someone said, oh, it's to confuse the Japanese, but in the final one, we got on those trucks in the same manner. So I thought, oh, here we go again, but we finished up at the railway station.
When you got to Sydney, you went by train from Melbourne?
There were two train loads, and one went on the bypass, I think. But it took a long time. It was dreadfully hot. The trains were packed, you know. Some of the fellas climbed up onto those luggage carriers. And I think the New South Wales trains at that time, country trains, were probably slightly better than the Victorian one. Of course, we had to change at Albury then. There was no standard gauge. But it was a terribly hot time, and, you know, every now and again the train would have to stop to let passenger trains and goods trains through. But they fed us pretty well on the way, considering the crowd that was on the train.
And what did you think when you first saw the Aquitania? Because it was a magnificent ship.
You know, I'd been on bay ships like the Adon, that sort of thing, but this looked enormous. You know, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. Great to have a trip on a tourist ship. But anyway, I'm pretty excited about that.
So when you got on board, did you have any kind of job during the voyage, or were you just down below?
No, I was fortunate. I shared a cabin right on A deck with the captain's berth. Being a sergeant, I suppose, it was only very, very small. When we had our kit bags, only two of us, and we had our kit bags and all our other gear, and there wasn't much room. But the platoon, they were way down right on the bottom. I forgot the number. But oh God, the stink was terrible. Someone come up at night, sit out in the open to get a bit of fresh air. But I don't remember how many that ship held normally, but it was certainly packed tight at the 53rd Battalion on, and 39th, and also a lot of other ancillary troops. It was packed to the hilt.
Did you have much to do with the 53rd Battalion at all?
Nothing at all. I didn't. I don't know whether anyone else did. But didn't have anything to do with them, really. So
the trip was fairly uneventful?
Pretty uneventful. There was a bit of a scare. I reckon there was a sub running around with the escorts. Did a few runs and dropped a few depth charges, but I think they speeded the convoy up, but it could only go so fast as one of the smaller ships, but cargo ships. But anyway, we got there pretty safely, and the weather was perfect, so I don't think too many got seasick.
And how did you feel when the Aquitania pulled into Port Moresby?
Well, I felt a bit excited about it. It was my birthday, actually, 3rd of January.
How old were you then?
Well, I was actually 20, but the Army thought I was 21 because I'd put my age up to join the militia. So the only thing that bothered us a bit was getting off the Aquitania. However, we did it, and then of course there was that long walk out to the 7 mile. They called a march, but it was really a walk with all our gear and nowhere to sleep, nothing but a bit of a rocky, dirty outcrop covered with mosquitoes and good God knows what. No food, no water, no nothing.
So it took a while for the ship to be unloaded and to get most of the supplies out.
Yeah.
Because the 39th were used as, I suppose, wharfies or navvies, were they on that?
Not at that stage, but we were ultimately, and that was a regular practice. That's how I came to be on the McDouey when it was bombed. You know, they were regular. The whole unit was rostered and different platoons, and would have to go into the thing they carried in by trucks. And this particular day I didn't have my platoon because they had been in there, I think, the day or two before, but I was put in charge of another party from a couple of the other companies, and we were unloading stuff from the McDewey onto a lighter. That's a sort of a shallow drafted thing, because at that stage, I don't know if it's been altered since, you could only get one boat up at the wharf in Moresby, and so they had to run this lighter backwards and forwards. Then the siren went, and I thought we'd run into the shore, but this fella in charge of it said, "Oh, you get your troops up onto the McDewey because they'll probably go for the wharf anyway." Well, that was a big mistake because they went for the McDewey. And I was up on the top deck actually. You know, a few of the fellas went down below. I didn't drink, but I think they went down to see if they could get some pee or something. But anyway, apart from a couple of the direct hits, where I was standing at the rail and watching them come, so a couple of bombs or several of them dropped in the water alongside the ship. Next thing I know, I was going through the air, hit up against the, I suppose, in front, under the bridge, and I lost my hat, a wristlet watch that it must have been loose, you know, one of those leather things on it. It went, and it was just like a giant kick up the backside. So it was a blast from somewhere. And anyway, when I shook myself, I discovered I was deaf, couldn't hear anything, and everybody was running around. So eventually we got everybody off, and I had another go the next day, but fortunately I wasn't there.
There were quite a few men killed on the McDewey. From
quite a lot. I know were down in the salon or saloon. Quite a few of their officers were killed and some badly wounded. They were our first casualties, actually, wartime casualties.
So the main involvement of 39th early on was the camp at the 7 Mile drone.
Yeah.
That's where your permanent camp was for quite a few months.
Well, it wasn't permanent there because we then moved our company, moved out towards Bootless Inlet, sort of about halfway between Bootless Inlet. You could still, we weren't all that far as the crow flies from the 7 Mile drone, because when the Zeros started coming, they'd sort of fly around over the top.
Can you remember the Zeros coming in?
Oh, yeah. Didn't like them much at all. But fortunately, they didn't have a go at our particular camp. They mainly concentrated on the airstrip. But they were fast, very fast fighter.
There was a lot of bombing raids at that stage.
Someone said to me, you know, when was your first actual bomb raid? Well, I don't remember the date, but I remember Hugh Kelly at the time was my platoon commander then. Of course, we were camped. I don't know where Alan Moore might have been promoted to 2IC of the company, I think. And anyway, we got the siren, and then it was at night time. I think they're Cowanissis, Japanese, and they came over and started to drop their bombs. So we got into the holes, made sure the fellas were into their holes, weapon pits, and I didn't like the sound of it much, but I was thinking, oh, they're going to get any closer, and then you pulled out a little flask out of somewhere. I know he said, have a drink of this. I had a drink of it. It was whiskey. I'd never had whiskey in my life before. I don't know that it did much for my nerves, but
there was some, during the bombing raids, the Burnsville shop or warehouse was bombed, and there was a bit of pilfering went on.
Oh, yeah. I didn't actually see it, but I heard a lot about it. I think, too, once the bombing started, a lot of the houses, the local people had all gone back to Australia. I think there were a few people latched onto things, moved into houses or whatever.
Can you remember during the bombing? Can you remember when the 75th Squadron Kitty Hawks arrived?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I didn't actually see it, but I heard it all. And they put a couple of them out of action. The Air Force weren't very happy. But for week after week after week, we're told we're getting these planes, fighter comes in, I was saying, gee, that's great, that's great. And then it got to the stage where they said, oh, Kitty Hawks, more like Tomorrow Hawks. And anyway, suddenly these planes turned up, and we'd been so accustomed to being strafed that those that were on the close perimeter of the airport, you know, Vickers and Lewis guns and whatever, they opened up on them because they thought they were Japs. And someone started to shout, oh, hold your fire, hold your fire. But they damaged a couple of them. So at least they were on target.
At this stage, Joe, did you was there much infantry training carried out?
But our platoon we did a few route marches, and on a couple of occasions Alan got me to give a bit of PT to the platoon because one or two of them hadn't done the right thing. So they learned a lesson. Yeah, oh no, we didn't do a lot of field training at all, really. But we did have a few patrols. When I say didn't much field training, we didn't sort of operate as a company or anything like that. But certainly the various platoons had to do patrols around the area. But we did a lot of those. One in particular was to load a plane had been shot down, and they thought someone had bailed out, so a patrol went out to locate them. But the plane was a bit of a mess, so there weren't too many found on that occasion. But apart from patrols, occasionally I'd go for a walk down towards Burtless and have a look around the area. We'd put up a lot of barbed wire there when the things looked like Chaps looked like taking us. Barbed wire, and I think huts, temporary huts. I think the idea there was to create the impression that a lot of more troops were there, actually, because they seemed to think that Bootless Bay would be an ideal landing place for the Japs.
Were you receiving parcels from home and things like that on a regular basis too?
I used to get parcels from both my mother and my Elaine girlfriend, and who I ultimately married, of course. And I used to have to pack them in a tin and then cover them with calico, sew them up. You know, I get cakes and cigarettes. That's the worst thing that happened to me, was learning to smoke.
Joe, at some stage the Japanese landed on the north coast at Gona and Buna, and you were told that the 39th had to meet them at some stage, march across Darwin Stanley's.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, actually, we got orders to move. The High and the Mighty suddenly decided that they wanted to put a drone over there in Gona. At that stage, the chaps hadn't landed, right? So it was decided that B Company would be the best company to send because we were the smartest. So off we set. And we had 4 packs to start with, but I didn't find it extremely difficult. You know, you can't get away from the fact it's a pretty tough place to walk when you've got full gear on. But some of the fellas found it extremely difficult, you know, with chafing and. In the job I had, I was sort of moving backwards and forwards, and I was pretty fit at that time. I was young, and I'd not long completed before I left the 32nd Battalion. I'd completed a couple of PNRT courses, which had me in pretty fine shape. But anyway, it was a long yak, but I survived it without much difficulty. Got a perspiration, I suppose, but I managed to carry another fellow's gear. He didn't have a rifle, he was a lieutenant, you know, he was violently ill. And a lot of them were like that, you know, particularly up the end of the ridge there. climb was terrible, you know, and it was muddy, and they were really struggling, a lot of the fellas. But anyway, I wouldn't say it didn't bother me, it did, but I found that I did it all right. And, it took us, I think, from memory, 6 days to get over there, and when we got over there eventually, as we haven't got a lot of time, we got into the Kokoda, and that was like heaven, walking on a bit of flat ground. You know, you come down from Deneki and through into the rubber plantation, and it was wonderful. Well, anyway, we spent a couple of weeks there. My job, one of the jobs I was given, was to prime all the grenades. Don't know whether you've seen a grenade. You've got to take the bottom off and then put the fuse in, and then issue those and issue ammunition and all that sort of thing. And then suddenly Sam was given orders to get down to Gona. So 11 platoon was sent off. That was Arthur C. Camp's platoon, and they got as far as a whaler. And Harry Mortimer's platoon followed, but they only got as far as Garari. And then the PIB had a group over there, and that's they heard this thunder, but it was the Jap. They thought it was thunder, but it was the Japanese shelling Gona and along towards Sanananda. And so that's when the landing took place. That's how our company was situated. We had one company that got to a whaler, one at Garari, and the other company was left back at Kokoda to look after the airstrip. So our first contact, the PIB made the first contact, but they only had a few troops there with rifles and nothing else. And then our 11 platoon made a contact. They did a bit of an ambush there, and of course, in very quick time, they were surrounded almost. So they pulled back to Wairopi, and that's as far as I got with company headquarters. And we set up an ambush right along, and our troops were still crossing the bridge. And so then when the first lot landed, first lot arrived rather, first there was one scout got up on this little narrow foot bridge and had a look around, and they'd all been told not to fire until an order was given. But anyway, then another Jap got up on the edge of the bridge, and he had a look around, they had a bit of a confab, and then a third fella got up, and I think the temptation was a bit too much for one of the Lewis gunners, and he opened fire. So everybody followed suit then. I think they might have knocked one of the scouts off, but within a very short space of time, we were rained with mortars, probably light mortars, 2-inch mortars. And then they kept punishing, and we were firing. Wherever we saw smoke, we'd fire. And then gradually you could see them moving along the river trying to find out where our flanks were. Of course, we only had a platoon plus a few others. And so when it was decided I got an instruction from the then 2IC Stevenson, can't think of his first name, and he told me we were going to move back to Garari, and that the platoon and the PIB were going to destroy the bridge, and then they'd pull back too. In the meantime, Sam Templeton had sent an instruction to C Camp not to make any stupid, brave efforts, but just to move back. So then there was another ambush set up at Garari, and that's Harry Mortimer's platoon were in the forefront of that. And then, of course, much the same thing happened. The Japanese used what we later called contact drill. As soon as the scouts struck problems, the sections moved out on either flanks and sort of tried to find where your flanks were. And then before long, we were surrounded again under mortar fire. And then we moved back, and it was decided to put up a good standard oivy. And then Colonel Owen came down, and he had a chat with Sam Templeton, and then went back to Kokoda, and what happened then, and he greeted, I think it was half a platoon of A Company under the command of, I'll think of his name in a minute, Doug McLean, and the other half didn't arrive there in time, so they turned up at Oivy. In the meantime, Sam Temple said to me, I want you to go back to Kokoda with Stevenson to take a couple of men, and by this time it was sort of getting dark, so we walked up to Kokoda, hardly taking in turns to lead. We had to cross quite a few little bridges, but one big one. Silly thing is, on the way there, we all walked across. It was just like a big tree sprung across the river. And anyway, we had a cup of tea there, and Stevenson had to obviously pass some information on, which he did, and then we started to come back. Well, this time it was pitch dark. When we got to this bridge, it was decided that Stevenson and the other one fellow would go across, and then I'd follow, and then one fellow remain on one side, and then he'd follow me, go over one at a time, because this tree was jumping up and down. So I got about halfway across, and I thought, God, I'm going to fall off here, so I slid down. And I realised suddenly that the fellow that was left on the other bank decided he wasn't going to stay there on his own. So he was right behind me, and he caused it to rock. Anyway, he had to slide down, got off, and then we got back to Oivy. Well, then, not long after that, the Japs arrived, and the big battle was on. And eventually, we got to almost around there. In the meantime, Sam Templeton was a bit concerned about the other half of McLean's platoon arriving there. They might get ambushed, because by now it was felt that the Japs may have been around that flank, round almost behind us. So he very foolishly, in my opinion, went back on his own. He didn't ask anybody to go with him. And then next thing, there was a bit of crackle of fire, and he didn't ever come back. So,
what was Sam Templeton like as a person?
Oh, he was a reticent sort of person. He didn't seem to say a lot. But, I think he would have been, I was only a sergeant, as the saying goes, and I did what he told me. But he was always pretty clear-cut in his instructions, and inclined to be a bit on the bluff side, I think. But I don't know how the other officers got on with him. But
was he well respected and looked up to by the troops?
Respected by the whole company, not a shadow of doubt about that. It was felt that he was a great soldier, knew what he was doing.
A good leader?
An excellent leader. But as I said earlier, it was a great shame, in my opinion, that he didn't have the opportunity to direct his whole company in a battle. But that was a bit of a history about, he put his age down and I put mine up, that sort of stuff. But no, he was a great man, and I was pretty upset when I discovered he had died or gone. But however, well then, of course, there's a bit of a story about there without doing waste a lot of time, but we eventually, with the assistance of Major Watson, who had with him a Papuan policeman, he reckoned he could get us out of there in the dark. So he took us down a sort of a cliff face into the river, and we got out. And then the idea was we'd go on a bit further and come back onto the Kokoda Track, but you couldn't get through the scrub, so we finished up getting to Deniki. And in the meantime, Colonel Owen, in view of what he'd heard with runners, he decided that his best bet was to pull back to Deniki, where he could defend it pretty better than he could Kokoda, because he only had virtually one platoon left there. And so he had done that, and of course there was ammo dumping food at Deniki, so he pulled back there. But when we arrived back there, he decided to move back into Kokoda, which we did. We took up a defensive position there, and then not long after that, the Japs arrived in great strength, and the battle was on.
Was that on the Kokoda Plateau?
Yeah, it's sort of drops off on both sides, and then at the end it goes down towards Gona. It was sloping, and that's like that Oivy track comes up to that end. So that's where most of the fighting, and that's where Owen was killed in that end.
What was Owen like? Did you?
Well, I didn't have a lot to do with him, only a cursory meeting, and then when we got to Kokoda, I met him, but didn't have a lot of conversation with him. I mean, he was the CO of the sergeant, but however, he wasn't that far away from where I was when he was killed. But then, of course, the Japs were raining the mortars on us, and they gradually, eventually broke through. And so we were ordered to, by this time, Major Watson took over, then we were ordered back to Dennehy.
Who was your platoon commander at this stage,
At
Joe?
that stage, I was acting CSM. I didn't have a platoon commander. So that's the way it was on my...
This is of B Company.
And B Company, yeah. And my job was ammunition and that sort of stuff. And I had to keep going around the platoons, but it became chaotic in the finish at Kokoda. So we pulled back to Dennehy, and then...
Was this during the night?
Yeah, pitch dark, and you didn't know whether there was a Jap or an Aussie there for a few minutes.
Because when we interviewed J.D. Mackay and a few others, and they talked about Jim Cowie getting them out.
Yeah, but that would have been the second time. I think.
Yeah, I would say so.
So we were there, and then we got turfed out, and then back to Dennehy, and then that's when we got Major Cameron arrived on the scene. And for some reason or other, he'd taken a dislike to B Company, so we were stuck in reserve. And then he decided to attack without making any patrols. And I know one of the company commanders had a pretty, shall I say, pretty bad argument with him about it, because he decided to send the three platoons, one straight up the middle, that was A Company, and the other two on either flank, one down towards Alderby. But of course, what he didn't know, because he hadn't sent out patrols, that the Japs had already arrived at Dennehy and they were almost around our position. So the strange thing about it was that A Company just literally walked down the track and reoccupied Kokoda. And the other two companies were held up, bogged down, because there were Japs everywhere. So they got there, they were there for a day and a bit, I think, and then they'd had much the same fate as B Company. They got surrounded and turfed out, but it did hold up the Japanese advance, because he had to pull some of his troops out of Dennehy and send them back to Kokoda. Well, then, of course, it was inevitable that the Japs had surrounded. By this time. They'd got more reinforcements, and I just don't know how many thousands there were, but they had a mountain gun going. And then the next step was Colonel Honour arrived, and he took over the battalion, and we had moved back by then to Isharava, which I don't know who made the decision, but then Cameron went, and Colonel Honour arrived. At one stage of the Isharava, I had to go back to company headquarters for some reason or another. I remember it was to do with MO, but then our company headquarters was just behind the platoons, what was left of them, that is, on this track. And it wasn't long after Ralph Honour had arrived there, and he was talking to an officer, and I didn't salute because we weren't supposed to do, but I walked past and had a bit of a conversation, and there were, mortars and bullets flying around, and he was showing this other officer, and it was the leaf that he put up, and obviously he was interested in that sort of thing, and he was telling me all about the leaf. But he struck me as a very cool man, very cool. And obviously he knew what he was about, because he was a good tactician, as it proved to be. And despite the wonderful job that he did, he didn't get much credit for it. Because I don't know whether you've heard the story about when we were finally relieved out of the campaign at Manari. We walked back to Koitaki or thereabouts, and the brigadier said to him, "Oh, well, you better go and talk, make yourself known to the boss." He said, "He's up here and this is Blamey." And so he got himself cleaned up as best he could, went up and said to Blamey, he said, "Oh, I'm honoured, sir." Well, there's that effect, and Blamey said to him, "Oh, You're just up from Australia, later on. That's how much he knew about what was going on. But
Were you
anyway,
at Koitaki when Blamey made that speech?
no, that was made to the 14th, 16th and 27th
27.
Brigade. But we heard about it. And I'll tell you, that's the most disgusting thing he ever did, because he didn't have a clue what was going on any more than the big Yankee actor,
MacArthur.
McCarver. And he didn't have a clue what was going on, and he criticised. But anyway,
So you
we
would.
performed pretty well at Isharava, and
What can you remember about Isharava?
oh, it was terrible. You know, the wounded were coming out, and the noise, you know, mortars, mountain guns, machine guns, the old Jukies and light machine guns, and then they'd attack, and then some of them would yell like mad, and then bang, they'd go down. We killed them like flies. And
You had Brens at that stage?
we had a few that had come up with the other companies. And, but up till then I hadn't seen a Bren gun, not even a picture of one, and neither did any of our troops. But they soon learned how to use them, because one of Ray Phillips, he managed to latch onto one when someone got killed. He treasured that like nobody's business.
The Japanese, there were a lot of Japanese attacking at Isharava. They came down on the side of the hill.
Yeah, on our flank, we were facing up this track, our platoons, and they were gradually getting thinner and thinner. And they kept attacking down there, screaming and yelling. And on one occasion, I was up at one of our platoons, and suddenly, you know, they're going down, bang, and suddenly a bugle went. They all pulled back, a few whistles. What's going on here? Anyway, they were just getting ready for another one, which they did. But we lost a lot of men there. Lost a lot of fellas.
Can you remember the 2nd 14th Battalion
Yeah.
coming into Isharava?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, when they arrived, they were sort of, the initial idea was that they were to relieve us, but the situation was such that they couldn't. So they had to sort of move in and take up positions sort of relative to the positions we were in, and on either flank. And we had I spoke to a couple of them at our company headquarters, and but apart from that, I didn't have a lot to do with them, but I know they were made very, very welcome when they arrived. And but before long, you know, couldn't be held. We were outnumbered, outgunned and everything. And so then it was decided to pull back a bit further into, I think I've got the name of the place, but another area, just Sharava. But the battle was on again there. We nearly got cut off again, but I think by then now our company was down to not much more than about 13 or 14 men, with sickness and killed and wounded. So then from then on it went back to Eora Creek, but it was a terrible, terrible battle, Isharava, and it's something you never forget. And I think the only thing to me that was worse was Gona. But you know, the blood was flowing, and the men, Japanese, screaming and yelling. It's one thing our fellas didn't do. They didn't make a lot of noise, just a few rude remarks now and again. But it's pretty terrible. Anyway, the second issue was still at Isharava, and much the same thing happened then. And then the orders, I don't know what the brigadier was saying to who, but we got orders to pull back there and then take up new positions, but much the same thing happened. And then we got turfed out, and then we had to cover the 2nd 14th move back to Eora Creek. And it was a strange situation really, because we were sort of down here, and then suddenly the Japs were appearing on the hill, so they were right over the top of us. But anyway, we managed to get out of there eventually, and then we moved back into another position that I recall, and we were then relieved by the 2nd 27th. They took over all their automatic weapons, grenades and that sort of thing. But we were there for a while, I suppose in a sort of reserve, and then we got orders to be relieved by the 2nd 27th Battalion. And they took over our positions and all our weapons, apart from rifles. And then we finally moved back to Minari.
That's when you had the parade.
That's when we had that parade. And
that was filmed by Damien Parra.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you know Damien Parra? Did you?
I didn't ever meet him personally. I saw him in the distance, that's all I can say. But I've read his story. Amazing character, really. Yeah.
And what did Ralph want to say at that parade? Can you remember much about
I can remember, but I can't recite it. But what he said was that the brigadier had asked him to advise the troops what a wonderful job they'd done, and how happy he was, and there were a few other things that he passed comment. I think it was in reference to the 53rd Battalion. He said, don't be judgmental, or words that affect on some of the things that have happened because they were placed in a situation. He didn't mention 53rd, but I think that's what it was directed at. And that's the type of bloke he was, Not much good blaming people for what they did. And anyway, he was very happy with B Company's operation at Isurada, also the camp. But however, when we got back to Minari and things were sort of a bit quieter there, I took advantage of the opportunity to take what was left of my boots off, and I had these khaki socks on, and when I pulled them off, all the skin came off on my feet. So I dove, I had my haversack, and I'd had a few odds in there, and I'd kept a pair of socks, a couple of khaki hankies in there, which strangely enough were dry, or almost dry. So I put the hankies over my feet, then pulled the socks on over, then put the old worn out boots on. And so I was able to walk. They were pretty sore, but I had a bad knock on one of my knees. But apart from that, I felt pretty hungry, tired, but still about.
How was the morale of the battalion even after?
Oh, it was pretty good. Those that were there, there's not a shadow of doubt. They were all a wonderful lot of blokes, and you couldn't help but have respect for your mates and whatever. They did a great job under the situation. We were half starved because we hadn't had much to eat. Right up back to Kokoda, when we moved back there, we got a little bit. But matter of fact, when we got back to Tinnicky, a bloke gave me a tin of baked beans, And I got stuck into that because I was so hungry. But then very shortly after, I threw it all up. My stomach couldn't handle it. I think that happened with a lot of them. But I'd say a lot of us weren't really fit by then. Pretty half-starved. And I suppose there'd be a certain amount of shock among us. Call it what you like. But they were still making jokes, some of them. I don't know what about, but probably about blaming or.
So after Minari, the battalion went back to Koitaki for a rest?
Yeah, it was in that area, and we've got clean clothes, and we got issued with greens, and then after a while we were moved out to another place, and trying to think where it was was out on Holbron Bluff, I think, yeah. And we were reinforced and re-weaponed, and we got then some, we had a few Tommy guns, yeah, and I think it was then we started to get a few Allen guns, and Brens, of course.
What was the Allen gun like?
Oh, fantastic. I managed to latch up to one at Gona. I don't know, someone got up some bloke with it, I think. And they were an amazing weapon. And then when I went to the PIB, I wouldn't have anything else. I carried an arm gun all the time. Amazing weapon, you know, you could drop it in the water and the mud and it still fire. They were a bit touchy. I know that one or two fellas killed, they dropped them, and the bolt system was rather pretty straightforward, actually. It had a very heavy weight at the front of it, and then a little thing came back. And it was the weight of the thing going forward on the spring that fired it, and then it just kept going backwards and forwards as long as you had the trigger down. It had a safe and a single shot or automatic. If you press the pad on it, the trigger just goes straight through the whole magazine. No, they're a wonderful weapon. I'm very happy about those. It would have been a pity that we didn't have them before, and the same with the Bren. They all ran hot. Eventually, at Pesharoa, got red hot.
So the battalion was reinforced, re-equipped,
Yeah,
freshened up a little bit,
yeah.
and then off to Gona.
Well, not immediately. We was, as I say, we're in this reserve position, and by then the Japs had arrived and sort of got as far as where they could overlook Port Moresby. I've just forgotten the name of the area. But that's how close they got to Port Moresby and probably Australia. But by then they were able to, from Owen's Corner, they were able to bring up our 25 pounders. So now the Japs were in the same position as we were earlier. They had a long way to carry their supplies and they were running out. Their troops were getting ill and getting killed. And now they came under 25 pounder fire. So then the attack came from then on. We weren't involved in that. We remained in reserve, but then they gradually pushed the Japs back until they got them down to the Gona area. And then they couldn't get them out of the holes. Gona, Sanananda, the Americans went in at Buna, and they couldn't or wouldn't get any further. So then, after a lot of discussion, Ramey and the brigadiers and whatever, they decided to see the American actor, call him what you like. And anyway, they convinced him that Australians would probably do the job because the Americans wouldn't fight. I don't think he liked that very much, MacArthur. So eventually, what now be the 30th Brigade, which included 30th, the 39th Battalion, the 53rd, 51st, or something, they'd amalgamated. And another battalion, we became the 30th Brigade. So they were brought over, and we took over the positions at Gona, I think the 2nd, 31st Battalion. And they were badly depleted. They had dug in, and we took over their weapon pits. And when it rained, the weapon pits, water came over the top of the ground, so you're standing in this much water anyway.
The conditions in Gona were appalling, weren't they?
Absolutely shocking, really.
Because it was in the wet season, so it was hot. And
well, it was always raining, and of course there were little green flies there, and they'd land on you, and it just looked as though they'd taken a piece out of your skin, but it was sort of went white. They'd bite somehow. Oh, they nearly drove you mad, and then the mosquitoes were just as bad. But one of the funny things that happened there, we were moving forward in one of these attacks, and suddenly something moved, and one of the blokes fired at it, and it was one of these kangaroo rats, and it had been there with all this din going on for God knows how long, and it took off. But it was rather funny, really. But
were you attached to a platoon, B company?
I was with the platoon. Then I was, what's his name? I mentioned his name earlier, the new fellow. So I'll think of it in a minute. I'm not sure whether it was 11 or 10, but I think it was 11 platoon.
Shields. Was it
No,
Shields?
no, it wasn't Shields.
Anyway, you were in
I was in a platoon anyway.
11th platoon as the platoon sergeant.
Yeah, yeah.
And tell us a bit about Gona.
Well, Gona was a shocker because we had several attacks to take the place, and there's already been a lot of attacks made by those battalions that we took over, but they'd got to the stage where they didn't have enough men. So I think I told you earlier that after the first attack, we went in under mortars and mortar smoke. And of course, we couldn't see the Japs, and all the Japs did was just fire into the smoke, and our blokes were going down like flies. How you got missed, I don't know. But anyway, Ralph Honor pulled it to a stop, and then they decided, the powers that be decided to send over the bombers, which turned out to be Wirraways with bombs under their wings. And they bombed the area, but they missed all the important positions. Not whether the bombs would have done anything, I don't know, even if they got direct hits, because they were well entrenched in these holes with thick covering over the top. And their perimeter went right round through the sand. So anyway, then I think Ralph said, well, we don't want any more aeroplanes. So we got that message across, and then the final attack was made, and we broke through, and there weren't too many of them left then. They were all killed, those that were dead, wounded. Some of them in the holes were standing on bodies, and the stench was beyond comprehension. Beyond comprehension.
It sounds an almighty mess.
Yeah, well, bodies everywhere, and even when we went round and passed round the back, bodies on the sand, because the earlier companies had attacked around the back, and there was one couple that really got to me, and these the two Australians, their bodies were all black now, but they were within about that much of a Japanese trench. They were killed, obviously, they were making for it. And so, pretty sad to get that close and get killed. But there were a lot of Australians killed there, and certainly a lot of Japs. Well, then we thought, we'd have a bit of a spell, and I managed to wash my face and get rid of the mud. And then we got a meal that was rice with a bit of corned beef in it, but I didn't feel very hungry, mainly because of the stink, I think. But we got a bucket of tea brought up, which was pretty nice, with a bit of sugar in it, and it was purple. Apparently it was made in apple tins, and whatever left of the apple had sort of influenced the colour. But however, I ate it with difficulty. And then next thing, we got orders to get ready to move, that we were going round to another place where some Japs were located. They'd been coming down, trying to join Gona to reinforce the Gona section. I think the 2nd 14th Battalion had stopped them.
Is this at Hattie's Village? At West?
Yeah, they call it Hattie's Village. I refer to West Gona, but that's the same thing. It was the same name. West Gona and Hattie's Village, the same thing, but it was named after Hattie, one of the 2nd 14th. But anyway, it was decided that Ralph Honor would take what was left his battalion around and around circular movement coming up behind this Jap position. And we had a couple of guides from the 2nd 14th Battalion. Anyway, they had us around. We had to stop overnight. Oh God, it was wet. Everybody was so wet, cold, miserable. But anyway, we had our rations reserved, a bit of food, and we moved on. Well, when our platoon, Ron Plater was his name.
The platoon commander.
He was the platoon commander, great guy. Anyway, we were in the van, and I had out 2 scouts, one of our sections, and one of these 2nd 14th Battalion. He was showing them the location. But that's when there were 3 officers, just Japanese, just blandly walking down the track. They were going down the creek for a wash, done up with their red taps on and everything. So they died very quickly, or one of them was slow to die. He was still huffing and puffing when we ran past. But unfortunately, that sort of alerted the camp. So then it was on for young and old again. And that's where Ron Plater got badly wounded, and Brett Jedgel, one of the section commanders, he was wounded. And we eventually got stuck because we just couldn't get any further forward. The fire was pretty heavy, but so then it was decided we'd hold, and Harry Morton's platoon was going to come in round on the flank. And anyway, that night, one while we were just in this, just behind the forward section, the runner was with me, and one of the Japs must have had a few mortars, and they dropped a few further over, which didn't bother us, but one went up pretty close, and he shot up in the air. I wondered what had happened, but he'd had a big hunk of shrapnel on his back. Went back to company headquarters. I went back, and there he was, with this big hole in his back. So I don't know what eventually happened to him. He was taken out, I suppose. But I was going a bit funny then. I had so while I was there, we got to the RAP bloke to give me something. I had this, what I thought was a tropical ulcer in the groin. And he took my temperature. It was almost dark. I don't know if he read it, but he said, "Oh, you're in a bad way, you know, you haven't just so much." But anyway, it was pretty close to danger, I think. So he said, "You better get back here in the morning and go out with the stretcher parties." So that night I got attacked by a chap with a sword. He came round the back, but fortunately I fired a shot at him and missed him, and he missed me with his bloody sword. Well, then the next morning I was getting worse and worse. So I went out, and I couldn't keep up with the stretcher party, so that's how crook I must have been. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I got lost on the way back. I don't know for how long. But, you know, they hang a tag around your neck. And eventually I got lost out in the scrub. I took this little track, a solid track, to dodge the mud, really. And suddenly found myself too far away, and I couldn't find my way back. Finished up going round in a circle, and eventually got back to that little track, and then walked back again, and eventually came to an RAP. And he got in the car and said, "Oh," and he made some funny comment about the accommodation, and that was just a little bit of cane stretched, lifted up from the ground because the water was that deep on the ground. Gave me some pills, and then I lost track of everything. I don't know how long I was there, but I can remember he gave me some more pills, and I think that could have been a few days or hours. I had to walk back, and then I got as far as Soputa, and much the same thing happened. More pills, and I don't know, I began to go a bit mental. So that was your scrub time? Yeah, scrub time. I also had malaria. Yeah. But then from there, they put me on a little jeep that had a stretcher hooked onto the side of it somehow, and there was a badly wounded fella in that, and I sat in my seat typically. Then we went from there to Papua. And then out. Well, Joe, on behalf of the 39th Battalion Historical Subcommittee, I'd like to thank you for this interview. Pleasure's all. Thank you.